Executive Assistants. By William Pattison. Office of Claude Lamont, April 29, 1995, 1:28 p.m. Please, you can't take it. Claude Lamont yelled as the stone-faced police officer took the sheet music of the Symphony of Death from him. The document was wrapped in a burgundy velvet cloth. You don't understand. People will die if you release it into the world. Levy Jackson straightened his meticulous purple dress coat and shook his head as he watched this pathetic display. How the great have fallen, he thought. Lamont looked like a shell of his former self. The last 10 years had been hard on the one-time successful agent. Jackson remembered him from the old days when Lamont represented the Twisted Syndicate. Those were great times, and Lamont was one of the hard hitters and represented his clients well. Now he looked old, beaten down, and just plain pathetic. He looked 20 years older than the last time Levy had seen him. His hair was now salt and pepper and heavily balding on top. Even his clothes looked ratty and were at least 10 years old. If you didn't know different, you would swear he was nothing more than some bum off the street. On the other hand, you would never see Levy Jackson present himself in such an unkempt and undignified fashion. Jackson was known for being a controlled operator with an exceptional cool, pimped-out dress style. It did sort of make him look like a throwback to the 70s, but on this 6'5", shaved-headed, African-American frame it looked good. Today he was wearing a purple jacket and slacks with a burgundy button-down shirt with a matching tie and handkerchief in the breast pocket. It was through this bold style that he was able to push his way up the ranks to the point that he was currently Vince Manfrenini's assistant and second-in-command at Silver Records. Next step was the big desk itself, and nothing was going to stop him from achieving that position, especially a burned-out has-been like Claude Lamont. The police officer brought Levy the velvet-wrapped bundle and handed it to him. Lamont was right behind him. Please, Levy, you can do this. Lamont begged. That symphony is cursed. It'll bring you only pain. I'm supposed to keep it safe. I promised Philip and Daisy. You were the one that convinced Grissini to sign the contract. Levy pointed out. My hands are tied. I'm merely the delivery person. The sheet music belongs to Mr. Manfrenini, free and clear according to the law. No. Lamont said, lifting his hands at Levy and taking a lung at him. Immediately the police officer and his brawny partner, who was on the other side of Levy, rushed in and grabbed Claude by his arms. No. Lamont screamed again. You can't take it. Levy pulled back slightly. He wasn't expecting such aggressive actions. It wasn't that he was afraid. It was the idea of that man's hands on him made him cringe. The police officers pulled Lamont's hands behind his back and handcuffed him. Then they forced him to his knees in front of Levy. Levy opened the wrapped parcel in his hands. Part of him thought that Lamont might be sneaky enough to switch the sheet music, which would it at all do? It had taken 4 other attempts to retrieve the sheet music get to this point. The other times the police had been less willing to intercede and help, but thanks to a sizable incentive from Mr. Manfrenini, that was not a problem this time. Thankfully, he saw the parchment pages and the title Symphony of Death written in delicate cursive on the top of the cover page. Don't touch it. Lamont yelled at him hysterically. Daisy touched it and it killed her. The poor fellow. Levy thought, shaking his head. The trauma of his secretary offing herself in front of him had royally fucked up his head. The man was a hopeless case. Do you want to press charges? The red-headed cop that had brought him the sheet music asked. No. Levy told him as he rewrapped the sheet music and started to turn to leave. He's no real threat. Please continue to restrain him until I'm out of the office. No need for another physical outburst. Then, without another word, Levy slipped out the office door and quickly headed out the reception room door. He was happy to be out of there. He had felt incredibly uncomfortable in the office. The air had been stuffy and it seemed like even with the shades wide open the place was incredibly dark and gloomy. Almost like the light of day refused to enter the place. Honestly, if he had the time he would make a side trip home to change his clothes and take a shower to wash the taint off his skin. It truly felt like bugs were crawling on his skin. But, alas, Mr. Manfrenini was awaiting his prize and he doubted the boss would tolerate any delays. The office of CEO Vince Manfrenini in the Silver Records building, 2:43 p.m. "So, tell me you got a present for me, Levy?" Vince Manfrenini asked. "Indeed I do, sir." Levy bowed slightly and held up the velvet-covered parcel for Manfrenini to see. "Excellent." A tall, obese, balding, middle-aged man in the grey Armani suit with the royal blue tie said with a wide smile. Levy even noticed a small dribble of spittle slip from the corner of Manfrenini's mouth. "Well, what are you waiting for? Open that puppy up and show us the prize." Levy pulled back the burgundy velvet from one side and then the other revealed the handwritten parchment pages beneath. Levy had to admit the Symphony of Death was a beautiful piece of writing. He had held sheet music before, but all that had been printed on plain white paper and was very bland in comparison. This sheet music extruded the passion that Philip Grassini put into it. "Bring it to me." The man behind the extra-wide mahogany desk urged, grasping and ungrasping his stubby fingers like a starving man waiting to receive a bowl of broth. Levy brought the sheet music over and set it on the desk in front of his employer. Vincent Manfrenini picked up the stack of parchment pages, closed his eyes, and let out a satisfied sigh. He opened his eyes, looked over at Levy and smiled. 10 years, Levy," he said with relish. 10 long years of dragging this thing through court and having to listen to that nutcase Lamonti's ghost stories. He put down the sheet music and slapped his hand on the desk hard. "Now it's here and it's all mine. I told you, my friend, that a little incentive goes a long way." Well, the 10,000 in bribe money to the cops didn't hurt either. Levy thought to himself. "We need to celebrate," Manfrenini said. "Tell Angie to pull out the Chateau Lafite 1787. Levy was stunned. The boss was royally celebrating. That bottle of wine had cost him $160,000 at auction. "Oh, and tell her to bring 2 glasses." Once again Levy was in shock. The boss never offered him a drink. In the past he had always had him pour the wine and watch him finish the bottle. This was definitely a rare occasion. Unless he had decided to two-fisted drink this time. He thought. He wouldn't doubt the fat fuck would do such a thing. Levy left the office and told the secretary outside to get the wine. When he got back, Levy noticed Mr. Manfrenini had grabbed the wooden box at the head of his desk. Opening the box, he pulled out 2 cigars. "You a smoking man, Levy?" Manfrenini asked, looking at Levy questioningly and cocking his head to the side. "Honestly, I don't recall ever seeing you smoke." "I do on occasion," Levy admitted. "I just don't do it on the job as a courtesy to others." "Excellent." He smiled as he offered Levy one of the cigars. Levy took it. Honestly, even if he didn't smoke he'd have taken the offer. After all, it was the boss who was offering. He took the cigar and ran it under his nose. He could tell it was Premo tobacco. Vince Manfrenini didn't accept less. Manfrenini slid his cigar under his own nose as well. "Nothing better than a good Havana," he confirmed, before biting off the end and spitting it in the small waste bin peeking out from under his desk. Then he put the cigar into his mouth and picked up the silver desktop lighter and lit the end. Tobacco smoke shot from the heavy-built man's cheeks like engine exhaust. The end of the cigar glowed red and Manfrenini pulled the cigar from his lips and blew out a large cloud that lifted to the ceiling. Manfrenini lifted the lighter to Levy, who bent forward and lit his cigar as well. He had to admit as the smoke filled his lungs that this was some smooth shit. Then he released the smoke and let it out in 6 short individual rings. This was the kind of life he was working for. He had no doubt that soon he would be the man smoking Cuban cigars behind the huge desk. He looked over at Manfrenini and saw that his boss had an amused look on his face. At that moment Manfrenini's secretary, Angela, she hated when he called her Angie, arrived carrying a silver tray with a bottle of wine, a corkscrew, and 2 tall wine glasses. Before becoming Manfrenini's secretary, Angelique had once been a runway model. Levy could still see her training in the way the boy-cut skinny blonde in the black power suit carried the tray over to the desk. She even had that intense focused stare that all those models shared. Manfrenini smiled up at Angelique as she carefully placed the items on her tray onto the desk. "That will be all, Angie," he told her. "Levy can take it from here. Thank you." Stone-faced, Angelique silently nodded her head. She then slipped the silver tray under her arm and headed for the door. Both Levy and Manfrenini watched as she left. Incredible ass. Levy thought as he watched as her seductive backside rolled from side to side as she walked. He had no doubt that she knew she had an audience. It was part of her job to know, and she played it well. The smile on the boss' face was a good indicator. "You know, Levy, I'd love to have some of that, but I've already got 3 Mrs. Manfreninis to support and 2 of those were former secretaries. I guess I've gotten smarter in my old age." Then the balding fat man looked up at his executive assistant with amusement. "Well, that just leaves more for you when you eventually sit behind this desk." Levy gave his boss a false surprised look. He knew the boss knew better. No one could hide anything from Manfrenini. Manfrenini waved him off. "Now let's not play games, Levy. Not you and me. I know you want my position behind this desk, and the truth is you keep up the good work like today you will be assured of it. After all, none of my dear wives managed to provide me with an heir. You are the closest thing I have to that." Then Manfrenini turned in his chair and looked up at the life-sized portrait of his father, Vincent Manfrenini Sr. Levy always found that painting creepy. The dagger-staring eyes followed you. Also, the man in the portrait looked plain mean. "You joined the company after my father passed on. Right, Levy?" "Yes, sir," he answered. "I believe he was gone 2 years when I was hired." "Well, my father was a hard man," Manfrenini told him. "He was fair, but he was hard, especially on me. Like yourself, I started out in the mailroom and had to work my way up the ladder. He played no favorites with me. In fact, I had to work doubly hard to prove myself to him. Thankfully, I was in your position when he found out he had cancer. He had made sure that I earned my way into my seat rather than just being handed it. I never got to thank him for that, though I doubt he would ever accept it anyway." Levy was frankly stunned by his boss' admission. Mr. Manfrenini had never in the years Levy had been his executive assistant ever confided in him in this way. Getting Grissini's sheet music must have been more of a feather in his cap than he had assumed. "Well, let us open this puppy up and have a toast to Philip Grissini and his masterwork," Manfredini said, turning back to his desk and admiring his prize again. Levy did as he was instructed. He made sure to pull the cork slowly, so not to cause any fragments of cork to fall into the wine. Then he generously filled his snifters with the burgundy juice and handed one to his boss. He picked up the other and waited for the boss to have the first sip. Manfrenini rolled the wine in the glass and sniffed it. Then he held his glass up to Philip Grissini. "May you be assured your work is in good hands. May you rest in peace, and may we make loads of money off your work. Salute." Manfrenini took a sip of his wine and his nose crinkled. He then nodded his head with satisfaction. After that he took another pull on his cigar. Levy took that as his cue. He took a sip of the wine and found his nose crinkled by reflex. The wine tasted horrid. By no means was Levy a wine expert, but on occasion he and his wife would partake in a bit of Burgundy. None of the wines he'd had tasted as vinegary as this stuff. Ah, nothing better than a good cigar and bottle of wine to celebrate a victory, Manfrenini said after blowing out the smoke. Then he took another mouthful of the foul brew. Yes, indeed. Levy lied as he took another sip from his glass. The taste got no better. He wondered if this was a test. Was Manfrenini testing him to see if he was a bud kisser? Was that what it was? He was confused. He put his cigar in his mouth and breathed in the smoke. He hoped that would improve the nasty taste in his mouth. It didn't. Then he realized the truth. It didn't matter how the wine tasted that mattered. It was just how much it cost. It was like everything else in Vince Manfrenini's life, just appearances. It had always been that way. You would never see him having a coney dog at Jiggy's or a double burger at Mama's. Nope. It always had to be the best pasta from the most expensive Italian restaurant in the city. After all, he was Vince Manfrenini and that meant he could only expect the best. This had been a very revealing day for Levy. In a way he felt sorry for Mr. Manfrenini and he hoped the position didn't do to him what it did to his boss. 8 days later, 9:45 a.m. The boss had called Levy to his office. From the tone of his voice it sounded like it was important, so he headed to Manfrenini's office at a casual sprint, but not so rushed that he looked like he was hurrying. After all, appearances needed to be maintained. As he strode out of the elevator into the outer office, Angelique addressed him from her desk. "They're waiting for you," she said matter-of-factly. "They?" Levy thought to himself as he silently went to the door and entered Mr. Manfrenini's office. Once inside he scanned the office and saw the heavy-built woman with a short boyish-cut hairdo sitting in the chair in front of Mr. Manfrenini's large mahogany desk. "Oh, good. You're here, my friend," Mr. Manfredini said from behind his desk, one of his Cuban cigars lit in his right hand. Its white trail of smoke spiraled up past the ever-judging eyes of the portrait of Vincent Sr. "Amanda, may I introduce my executive assistant, Mr. Levy Jackson," he told the woman with overt enthusiasm. Then he turned to Levy. "Levy, this is Miss Angela Sullivan." "Sullivan?" Levy's mind echoed. "Sullivan?" he asked, "as in Bo Sullivan of the Sullivans?" "That was my father," Angela confirmed, and she got up and faced Levy. "He passed on a couple years ago." "I know," Levi said. "Your father was an incredible artist. Very few people could make a career out of doing only acoustic." "He was unique," she said, simply. "Angela's interested in our little treasure," Manfrenini told him, before taking another pull on his cigar. "The Symphony of Death?" Levy asked, surprised. Manfrenini nodded and he let out another mini cloud of smoke. Levy was honestly stunned by the news. "Now wait a minute, the last time I heard you were still playing with your dad's old band," he stated, looking over at Angela again. "I am," she said, simply. "But the Symphony of Death is a metal-style rock opera piece. Grissini created it to be played with electric guitars and synthesizers," Levy said. "Why would you be interested in it?" "Angela wants to do it acoustically," Manfrenini told him. "What?" Levy asked, stunned. "And you're considering it?" "I find the idea intriguing," Manfrenini said. "But don't you think the fans will want to hear it played the way Grissini meant it to be?" Levy pointed out. Manfrenini gave him a shrewd smile. "They will get that version as well, but we have Miss Sullivan here right now offering to give the people something more than their expectations. I like the sound of that. But this is a big risk." People will be expecting Grissini's masterwork, not some acoustic version of it. This could end up blowing up in our faces. Why take the risk? Have you ever known me to take the easy path, Levy? Manfrenini pointed out. Remember, it took me 10 years to get this sheet of music in the first place. Which is why I don't understand why you want to do this now. Wouldn't it be smarter to hold off on something like this? He pointed out. Because I'm the boss and it's my property to do with as I will, he stated. So, if I wish to allow Miss Sullivan to do the symphony acoustically, I will. But why take the risk? Levy pushed. Now you know me better than that, Levy. Actually, it will be Angela here who will be shouldering the risk, Manfrenini told him. I've agreed to partially finance the first half of her live tour. If the critics and the fans like what Angela and her band does, I will not only fully finance the second half of the tour but also have a crew go with her band for that second half and record a concert album as well as a tour documentary. And you're willing to take a risk like this? Levy asked, looking over at Angela. I have confidence in my abilities and my band's, she told him. This still sounds insane to me, Levy told them both. Let's hope you're wrong, Manfrenini told him. Because I'm putting you in charge of managing my side of this production and I expect you to do everything you can to ensure the success of this venture. You expect me to manage this when I have no confidence in it? Levy was flabbergasted. Do I need to remind you that it's your job? Manfrenini pointed out. Also, I expect you to set up the first 4 venues for 2 months from now. This production goes on the road and no excuses. Levy looked back at Angela. And you're actually going to agree to this? His head was starting to throb with stress. I already have, she told him. The papers are signed. Levy's jaw dropped. He was speechless. We're not going to have a bunch of gimmick or special effects. We will let the music stand for itself, so stage design should be simple, she told Levy, ignoring the look of disbelief on his face. The main thing will be getting the band itself ready, but, as I said, I have confidence in them. As I do with you, my dear. Manfrenini said, standing up from his desk. He walked over and put his hand on Angela's shoulder. Now if you would please make yourself comfortable in the outer office. I need to talk with Levy for a couple of minutes and then he'll get you copies of the symphony so you can get your people started. Without another word, Angela Sullivan left the office. For Levy it felt like the office was closing in on him. He looked at his grinning boss with total disbelief. You already signed the contract? I figured you might be a bit reluctant, Manfrenini told him. A bit reluctant, Levy echoed. I'm completely floored. And you somehow expect me to salvage this turd you have handed me? Oh, I expect nothing of the sort, Manfrenini said, putting his hand on Levy's shoulder. A shock, like electricity, went through the body of Levy Jackson. Suddenly he felt like he was falling. His eyesight blurred for a moment. When it came back, he was no longer in Manfrenini's office. Levy didn't recognize the room, but he did recognize the name on the drum set in the background. It was the Sullivans. He also knew the woman who was standing uncomfortably close to him. It was Angela Sullivan. She looked at him with a look that was a mix of surprise and fear. Then he noticed the blood that started to flow down her face. He tried to speak but nothing came out. Also he tried to step back but he couldn't move. He heard women screaming from behind him. We can't get out. He heard one of them yell. It's stuck. Then in front of him he saw something that chilled his blood. What looked like a mummified corpse came shambling into view. This creature was a mess. Part of its leathery skin was ripped away, showing a yellow partial skull with white and boiled fish-like eye protruding from the socket. He could also see that living things moving beneath its dirty and holey black shirt with an Indian and a wolf across the front of it. Even in this horrific condition, Levy recognized this dead man walking. It was Bo Sullivan. Again, boy. The dead man rasped. Again. A moment later, Levy let out a silent start as an axe came down from behind him and split Angela's head in half right down the middle. The two halves split apart, revealing the bloody pink brain matter. A fountain of blood shot out from it. Blood hit him in the face. He even tasted its metallic flavor as some of it slipped between his lips. Amazingly enough, the vision before his eyes slipped back a bit. Somehow he was now behind a long-haired man wearing a leather jacket and blue jeans. He was busy chopping Angela's body into bits with his axe. Blood was puddling around the remains of the body mixed with other bodily fluids. "Chop that bitch, boy," a zombie-like thing said, cackling with amusement. The guy looked back at Levy, his eyes wide, budging, and insane. Then the scene changed and he was back at the office again. But, to his surprise, things looked different. Mr. Manfrenini was sitting behind his desk again, but he looked completely disheveled. His tie was loose and dangling down from his wrinkled white shirt. He had at least 3 days' worth of stubble on his face and his eyes were puffy with dark circles underneath them. On his desk, which was strewn with papers, was a glass and a half-empty bottle of whiskey. "I'm sorry." Levy heard him mumble. "You should be sorry." Levy was surprised to hear another voice say. He thought they were alone in the room. "You are a disgrace to the Manfrenini name." Then he realized where the voice was coming from. It was coming from the painting of Vincent Manfrenini Sr. "I left you in charge of my business and look what you've done to it?" The voice berated Manfrenini. Levy was surprised by the sight of his boss. He truly looked like a scolded child. Manfrenini lowered his head and tears ran down his cheeks. "Now what are you going to do to make this right?" the voice from the glaring painting asked. "You know there is only one thing left for you to do." Manfrenini licked his lips nervously. He opened the left side lower drawer of his desk and pulled out a shiny new pistol. Levy tried to say something, but he was mute. "What the hell?" his mind screamed. He tried to move, but once again he was frozen in place. What the hell was going on? He asked himself. What was happening to him? He watched as Manfrenini pulled out a box of bullets out of his desk and reluctantly started loading the pistol. "You are such a lame dog, boy," the voice said. "You know what we do to lame dogs?" "Yes, Daddy," Manfrenini said before sticking the barrel of the gun in his mouth. "Then do it." Manfrenini pulled the trigger. There was a loud bang. Blood and pieces of bone and brains splattered onto the painting of Vincent Manfrenini Sr. The lifeless body of Vince Manfrenini fell forward onto his desk, exposing the gaping hole in the top of his head and the pink bloody mush that was the remains of his brain, which oozed out onto the top of the desk. Levy let out a gasp and pulled away from Mr. Manfrenini. "What the hell?" the startled record executive bellowed. Levy stumbled over to the chair in front of Mr. Manfrenini's desk and grabbed the arm. He fought and tried to slow his breathing. He was hyperventilating. "Goodness, Levy," Manfrenini said, looking at him with surprise. "Are you all right? You're sweating." "Sweating?" he said to himself silently. He felt his face. Indeed, his face was wet with sweat. "Sit down, man. You look like you're ready to fall on your face," Manfrenini ordered. "But what about Miss Sullivan?" he asked weakly. "You let me worry about that," his boss told him. "You, my friend, are off to the hospital." "No, Levy started to protest. But he was cut off. "Don't argue with me. That is an order," Manfrenini informed him. "Now will you please sit down?" Levy did as he was told. He had no choice. Resigned to his fate, 15 minutes later Levy allowed himself to be wheeled through the office, where he was met by concerned looks by all the office personnel he passed, and out of the building on a gurney by 2 ambulance attendants to the waiting ambulance. He was driven to the County General Hospital where he was taken to the emergency ward. After 5 hours of sitting and waiting he released with a prescription for pain medicine for the headache he had developed while waiting. As for anything related to the incident in the office, he was told by the doctor that he guessed it was all stress-related and was given the suggestion to take a couple days off from work and rest. This was reiterated by Mr. Manfrenini when he called to find out what happened. From that moment on Levy tried to blame his vision on simply too much caffeine and no lunch that day. He convinced himself that was it, because he definitely didn't want it to be the alternative. But 3 days after his trip to the emergency reality struck. It happened in the evening after he got home from work. He was propped up in bed beside his wife, Claudia, watching the evening news, which was their regular routine. For some reason they enjoyed watching the news before having sex. It was their thing. Claudia was actually blowing in his ear when the news story showed on the TV sitting on the stand in front of them. The music industry and fans had a shock today. The blonde anchor woman on the screen said, "Tragedy has struck the world-famous acoustic group, the Sullivans." Then a man's face appeared on the screen and a chill went through Levy's body. Garth Wilswain, the lead singer of the group, is suspected to have brutally murdered his bandmates, the Sullivan sisters, and then took his own life. The woman continued, "Police are investigating and Channel 5 will keep you informed as more information comes to light on this tragedy." Levy's mind was racing. The face of the man on the screen was same one that was in his vision. It was the man he saw hacking up Angela Sullivan with the axe. The man's face had been splattered with blood, but Levy knew it was him. The first part of his vision had come true. Levy jumped out of bed, startling his wife in the process, and grabbed the light green-colored phone by the bed. He immediately called Mr. Manfrenini. "Hello?" came the gruff voice from the other end of the phone. "Mr. Manfrenini." Levy started, but his boss cut him off. "I know." The next day was a nightmare. Somehow the media found out about the Symphony of Death and the supposed curse on it. It was all over the news. The call center at Silver Records was overrun with reporters. It got so bad that Mr. Manfrenini called for a press conference. "Where is Manfrenini?" the dark-haired female reporter for Channel 5 insistently asked. "Mr. Manfrenini is a busy man. I'm his executive assistant, Levy Jackson. I can answer any questions you might have," Levy said from behind the podium they rarely brought out except for press conferences. He was standing in the lobby of the Silver Records building. The lobby was filled so tightly that some reporters were actually standing outside the glass doors and out in the parking lot. "Fine," Jason Wu from KBRC Channel 12 said. "What is it we heard about how the Sullivans had been getting ready for a tour performing Philip Grassini's Symphony of Death?" Mr. Manfrenini had ordered Levy to avoid questions like this. "I can't comment on that at this time," he said. "What about how the symphony is cursed and people associated with it seem to die?" a reporter from the back of the crowd yelled. "That is pure nonsense," Levy responded. "Excuse me. Are we rational adults around here or superstitious children? That is crazy claptrap started by a man who became unhinged when his assistant tried to kill him. It is a cheap urban legend with no truth in the real world. He lied. Is there anything else we can answer for you?" "Come on," the reporter persisted. Claude Lamonti had locked away that symphony for a decade. It took a court order for Manfrenini to get hold of it. Why did Lamonti hold it back so long? Philip Grassini died the night he finished the thing. What have you got to say about that? Ask Claude Monti. Levy told him. Though I gather you already have. None of his excuses or anything he says is rational. Claude Monti is a very disturbed man. At that point, with angry yells from the crowd, Levy ended the press conference and walked away from the podium. It would be a waste of time and breath to continue, and he had expressed everything Mr. Manfrenini wanted to the press. The truth that Mr. Manfrenini had managed to hide from the press was that 20 of the people that had been working on the stage design and costume work for the tour were either in the hospital in critical condition or dead, pretty much anyone who had had access to the sheet music copies. They had all been accidents, but it all happened within 24 hours of the murders. He silently thanked God for that miracle as he made his way to Manfrenini's office. It had been bad enough trying to play damage control with the murders. "How's he doing?" Levy asked as he passed Angelique's desk. "He ordered me not to let anyone in," she told him. "Well, it doesn't include me," Levy told her. "He's on his third bottle of Kentucky whiskey," she added with a touch of concern. Given that she didn't protest when he went to the door and opened it, he figured she agreed with his assessment. Upon entering the office, he heard something that gave him a chill. "It's your fault, Junior," he heard a voice say. "You're responsible." The lights in the office were turned down except for the lamp on Manfrenini's desk. Levy looked around, but he didn't see anyone in the shadows. From what he could tell, it was just Mr. Manfrenini, himself, and the eternally scowling visage of Vincent Manfrenini Sr. The last brought the chill again, given what he saw in his vision. "Mr. Manfrenini," Levy said when he got to the desk. Manfrenini was slouching in his chair. 2 empty whiskey bottles were lying on their sides, discarded on the desktop. The other bottle was sitting in the boss' right hand, half empty. "Ah, Levy," Manfrenini slurred from his seat behind the desk. "How did it go with the vultures from the press?" "I conveyed to them what you instructed me to say." "Good," Manfrenini said, giving him a sloppy grin before downing the shot glass in his left hand. He immediately attempted to refill the glass and sloshed a little bit of the whiskey on the top of his desk. "That's sad," Manfrenini said, looking down at the small puddle on top of his expensive desk. Then he looked up at Levy. "You want some, Levy?" he asked. "I could have Angie bring you a glass. It's the good stuff?" "No thank you, sir. I'm fine," he said. Then he carefully took the bottle out of Manfrenini's hand. Surprisingly, the boss didn't try to stop him. He placed it across the desk, out of the boss' reach. "And I think you've had enough," he said in calm monotone that would have made an English butler proud. "Why don't you let me have Angelique get you a nice cup of coffee? Then we can see about having your driver take you home. After all, the press conference is over and I'm perfectly able to handle any members of the press that might return. You see, even your boy don't think you can handle the job," a voice said from behind Manfrenini. "What was that?" Levy asked, looking around. The only thing he could see behind the boss was that damn painting. "What?" Manfrenini looked up at him with bleary eyes. "Nothing," Levy told him. But it wasn't nothing. He'd heard the voice clearly twice. This time he was practically on top of it. "Nigger boy thinks you're incapacitated," the voice said again. "Why did you even put him in this position, Junior?" "I wouldn't have." Levy looked up at the painting of Vincent Sr. The voice was definitely coming from there. But how? He asked himself. Was there a speaker behind the painting? If there was, it was a really good quality one because it sounded like the person was right there. But his gut told him there was no speaker, and he doubted Mr. Manfrenini would allow him to check the painting anyway. He recognized a voice. It was the same one that was in his vision. He realized if he was right, what he was dealing with was something he couldn't handle alone. Unfortunately, He dreaded having to deal with the one person he knew could help. Lord help him. It took 4 cups of coffee and a lot of encouragement to finally get Mr. Manfrenini in the company limousine and on his way home. That damn painting had been berating him the entire time. Honestly, Levy wanted to put his fist through the damned thing. If he'd had to hear the fucking thing refer to him as nigger or boy one more time he would have, which wouldn't have pleased the boss in the least. After he made Angelique promise she would inform him if Mr. Manfrenini returned. He had no doubt the old man would. Then he went and made sure his people knew to keep the media at bay until he returned for his little excursion. He had confidence they would do a good job, after all he was the one they were afraid of. Levy rushed to the airport in his red SVT Cobra. Unfortunately the only flight he managed to get to New Orleans was the red-eye. It was 10 o'clock in the morning when he excited the cab in front of his destination, the Laveau Voodoo shop, in an out-of-the-way corner of the French Quarter. After he paid the cab driver and sent him on his way, Levy looked over the weather facade of the shop. The place looked far worse than it did the last time he had seen it all those years ago. The white exterior paint was chalky, cracked, and peeling. Cheap as always. He thought to himself, shaking his head. Too cheap to pay for someone to paint this dump. Even the name of the shop had faded nearly to the point of being barely readable from the street. He remembered when he was a child the letters on the sign had been a bright red. Now you would swear they were light pink. But the truth was the readability of the sign didn't matter because everyone in New Orleans who needed to find Laveau's found it anyway. He headed up to the front door, which was covered in green scales of chipping paint, and went inside. The air inside the shop was heavy and dusty smell. Old chipped and scratched white painted tables covered with various size bottles and jars full of powders and liquids were scattered around the shop. One table was covered with different styled voodoo dolls. There was a worn sign on the table that read "Authentic Voodoo Dolls." This brought a light smile to Levy's face. Authentic? He thought. So, you have come home. He heard a scratchy old female voice say from the other side of the room. A skeletal black lady in a blue dress with a white apron, which looked like something out of Gone with the Wind, came out of the doorway that was behind the main counter. She also had a white cloth wrapped around her head like a turban. How long has it been, Domitris? She asked. My name is Levy, he told her. That's your middle name, boy. She replied sharply. Don't get mouthy with me. I asked you a question. 20 years. Levy responded in a low tone. 20 years. The woman said back at him. 20 years and you couldn't find time to come and visit your mama. I'm sorry, ma'am. He said like a scolded child. Then come over here and give your mom a hug and kiss. She prompted. He did as he was told. He went over to her and put his arms around her. She felt a lot more bony and fragile than he remembered. He gave her a light kiss on her cheek. It felt like tan leather. So, look at you in your fine suit, she said as he released her and stepped back. I bet you have one of those loud sports cars too and live in one of those fancy studio apartments out there in California. How do you know I live in California? He asked, surprised. I'm your mama. You think I wouldn't keep track of you? She said. So, you're some big shot out there, she said. Well, you have no clue about the power you gave up when you refused to stay here and take over this shop from me? Now, thanks to you I'm having to train your cousin Mabel. That girl. She shook her head. I never wanted this. Music is my life, not peddling fake magic on tourists, he told her. You dare call my work fake? She said, outraged. I am an artist at what I do. Mama, you sell colored powders and perfume water. He nearly reminded her that he had been the one who used to clip off the Made in Japan tags off the voodoo dolls. But the real stuff is in the back, boy, she reminded him, and that is true power and prestige. Our family has been in this business for generations. We are the Lavs. We are voodoo in New Orleans. That's fine for you and Mabel, if she really wants it, but I wanted to take my own path. I needed to get away and build my own life. I felt trapped here," he said. "So, what brings you home now? Obviously something's happened. Either you've been playing with some major mojo or you just got close to some because something awoke up your gifts." "Gifts? What gifts? What do you mean?" he asked. "It's in your blood, boy," she told him. "You have the blood Maria Laveau running through your veins. She had gifts. Your grandma had gifts. I have gifts. And you have gifts, boy. It is just that your gifts have been dormant and something has awakened them." The vision. His mind screamed. When Manfrenini touched him. He opened his mouth to tell her, but she held her hand up to stop him. "Let me see for myself," she told him, putting her fingers on the sides of his face like Mr. Spock doing a mind meld. Levy started to protest, but a spasm shot through his body and immediately he was in the vision again. He saw Angela Sullivan being hacked up again. Then he saw her killer. And once again he saw Mr. Manfrenini blow the top of his head off. Levy's mother released her grip on the sides of his face. She stumbled backward, but grabbed the counter for support. "Jesus help you, boy," she said, breathlessly. "You've got yourself mixed up in some serious mojo." "What was that?" he asked, nearly pleading. "What's happening to me?" "You got the sight, like your grandma," she told him. "Unfortunately, through that gift you have connected with something powerful, an ancient evil. You have gotten a peek into its plans. The murder has already happened," he told her. "Yes, but your boss touched you and you saw its plans for him as well," she said. "You have a rare opportunity here, boy. You can break the sequence of events. You can possibly even stop this evil in its tracks." After that, Levy told her about the voice coming from the painting. "That's how it's getting to him," she explained. "His father is his Achilles heel. It's using that to push him into taking his own life, thus damning him. You need to get your ass back there and stop him." Levy turned to leave. "Time is not your friend, boy," she pushed. "The hourglass has been turned and the sands are falling." Levy rushed outside and grabbed the next cab that came by. Then he headed straight to the airport and grabbed the next flight back to San Francisco International Airport. Unfortunately, he had to transfer flights 3 times and had 2 one-hour stopovers on his way. His entire flight time took 7 infuriating hours. It was evening when his plane finally landed. He was just getting into his car when his Motorola mobile phone rang. He recognized the number. "What is it?" he asked. "Where have you been?" Angelique asked. "I've been trying to call you for hours." "I had no signal on the plane," he responded. "Well, Mr. Manfrenini came back to the office. He looks terrible," she told him. "I tried making excuses to keep an eye on him. I brought him coffee and reports. He ordered me to bring him a shot glass and whiskey. He told me not to bother him or I'd have to find another job. So, they got to him at home as well." He thought to himself. "I opened the door a crack and listened to him. He was arguing with someone. He must have been on the phone because there was no one in the office with him." She continued. "I'm around 20 minutes away. Keep your ear to that door," he told her. "Please hurry," she said with the emotion he had ever seen come out of her. "I'm really concerned." Whoa, he thought. If the stone goddess of the office was concerned, it was definitely serious. "I'll try to get back as fast as I can," he assured her before hanging up and throwing the phone on the passenger seat. His mother's voice echoes in his head. "Time is not your friend, boy." The hourglass has been turned and the sands are falling. He hoped he wasn't too late. He turned the ignition key and his SVT Cobra came roaring to life. He backed the sports car out of the parking spot. Let's hope the highway patrol officers are on a donut break, he thought as he put his pedal to the metal. His luck was definitely with him as he made his way down the highway to Redwood Shores and the Silver Records offices. He got several annoyed honks from commuters on the way and in a couple instances nearly sideswiped a couple cars as he weaved around traffic. Thankfully the traffic was light so he had plenty of room because he was going way over the speed limit. Glancing at his watch after he turned into the parking area and screeched to a halt at the front entrance to the Silver Records building, he noted the trip had only taken him under 15 minutes to complete. It was a new record for him he never wanted to try and beat. He had been white-knuckling it all the way. He quickly got out of the car and ran through the lobby door, nearly running into Elvis Madu, the lead singer of the popular reggae band Baka, and his manager. Levy yelled back a quick apology to them. Madu and his manager watched Levy run down the hall toward the elevator with a mix of surprise and anger on their faces. Angelic was waiting for him when he arrived at the outer office. He was still arguing with someone after I got off the phone with you. Now it's quiet in there, she told him. The look in her eyes caused a chill to run through him. Was he too late? He didn't stop to answer her. He just headed straight to the door and went inside the office. You are such a lame dog, boy. You know what we do to lame dogs? Levy heard the voice say. Levy knew what that meant and yelled stop at the top of his lungs as he ran up to his boss' desk. Vince Manfrenini sat stunned behind the desk holding his shiny new pistol, looking like a kid who had been discovered with his hand in the cookie jar. Don't listen to it, Mr. Manfrenini, Levy told him, half pleading with him. It's trying to play you. You can hear him? He said, looking at his assistant with surprise. Yeah, that's why I've been gone all day, he told him. I was out getting help. My family knows about situations like this. Levy slowly started to move around the corner of the desk. He knew he had to keep Mr. Manfrenini talking until he got in the right position. Don't listen to him, the voice from the painting demanded. You know what you have to do, Junior. Now stop talking to the nigger and get the job done. Levy was nearly in position, but he could see that Manfrenini was starting to falter. Manfrenini started to lift the gun again. He had a look of a punished child on his face. That isn't your father talking, Levy countered. It's a lie. It's lying to you. Manfrenini stopped and looked over at Levy with a confused look. You heard me, boy, the voice ordered. I gave you an order. Manfrenini moved to lift the gun again, but immediately Levy was on him. He grabbed the arm that had the gun in it with both hands and roughly pushed it down toward the desk. The gun went off and the bullet hit the wall at the other end of the office near the outer door. Levy saw quick movement out the corner of his eye. He felt the pain of the impact against his skull and heard the sound of glass shattering as well as the burning feeling of alcohol hitting an open wound. Then, as his vision blurred and he lost his grip on Manfrenini's arm, he felt a warm trickle of liquid flow down the side of his face along with the whiskey. He grabbed onto the edge of the desk to keep himself from losing balance and falling over. He shook his head to try to ward off the effects of the blow. As his vision cleared, he saw that Manfrenini was facing him now with a gun pointed at his chest. Why did you stop me, Levy? Manfrenini asked with a mix of surprise and anger. He jabbed the gun in Levy's direction as he talked, which really made him feel uncomfortable. Because you don't want to do this, Levy told him, still slightly groggily. You're being manipulated. At that moment Angelic rushed into the room. She took one look at the scene and let out a gasp. Get help, Levy ordered her. Mr. Manfrenini looked over at her and opened his mouth to say something, but by the time he did she was already out the door of the office. He turned back to Levy and glared at him. "Why do you care?" he asked. "Why are you trying to stop me? It's not like we're friends or anything. If anything, it's to your advantage if I die. You'll have this desk and all the power you've ever wanted." Levy looked his boss in the eyes. "I don't want it this way, not if it means your blood on my conscience. It's that damn symphony. It's playing with you and fucking with your head. Stop wasting time, boy." The painting barked at Manfrenini. "I'm sorry," Manfrenini said to Levy as he lifted the barrel of the gun under his chin. "No," Levy screamed at him. Levy grabbed for the gun again, but he was too slow. He heard a deafening bang that rang in his ears and saw a splatter of blood, bone fragments, and brain matter shoot from the top of Mr. Manfrenini's head and hit the painting of Vincent Manfrenini Sr. The pulpy red matter dribbled down onto the hardwood floor. Mr. Manfrenini's body dropped the gun onto the floor and started to fall forward, but Levy caught it and held it up in his arms. Tears welled in his eyes as he let out a scream of pain and frustration. He stood there cradling the remains of the dead man's head on his shoulder. From that moment on, things happened in a blur for Levy Jackson. A few moments later, Angelic and a couple security guards came rushing in. Angelic ran out of the room screaming. A bit later, the paramedics and the police came. They ended up having to pry Mr. Manfrenini's body free from Levy because he was holding him in a protective hug and refused to let go. As the people from the coroner's office were taking Manfrenini away, Levy made them promise they would be gentle with his former employer. He told them it was his duty to make sure Mr. Manfrenini was treated right. After that, Levy was moved over the visitor's chair in front of the desk and had the cut on his head patched up by one of paramedics. He was then carted off to the police department for questioning and to write a statement. It was hours later that he was finally released and was taken home to the comforting arms of Claudia. June 10, 1995, 11:45 a.m., the office of CEO Levy Jackson in the Silver Records building. Levy shifted in his new dark brown leather desk chair. His new assistant, Doug Sobat, had acquired for him. Doug had informed him that it was the latest model that was guaranteed to provide optimal back support. It wasn't that the chair was uncomfortable, it was that it was new and he was going to have to get used to it. It was much like everything in his life right now, like being in what he still considered Mr. Manfrenini's office. It all felt odd. He had all the office furniture taken out and new furniture bought, even the mahogany desk, though honestly he couldn't tell the difference. He simply didn't feel right sitting behind Mr. Manfrenini's desk. The most noticeable difference in the office was that he had had the portrait of Vincent Manfrenini Sr. taken down and tossed. After all, it had a bullet hole in it as well as Vince's brains splattered over it. It would have been a bitch to clean. In its place, Levy had had a large portrait of Vince Manfrenini Jr. taken from the lobby and placed on the wall behind his desk. It felt comforting having Vince's eyes watching over him, especially during this transition time. He figured he'd have a portrait commissioned of himself and put that in the lobby. Maybe he'd even wear his purple suit for it. After all, he wanted it to be clear that this company be pimpin' now. The thought of that put a grin on his face. It was the first grin he'd had in weeks. He had even been wearing his black suit with his traditional red button-down shirt and burgundy tie since the funeral. It was his morning outfit. Levy reached over to the cut glass bottle sitting a silver platter on the right side of his desk and pulled off the glass stopper from the top of it. He poured some whiskey into the two matching glasses sitting on the tray next to the bottle. That was another change, no tacky-looking whiskey bottles on the desk. This was a class act. He picked up one of the glasses of whiskey and tapped it against the other. It made a soft, rhythmic clang. "Here's to you, Mr. Manfrenini," he said before downing the shot. Suddenly the door to the outer office burst open and a goth-looking guy wearing all black leather and sporting a large heavily sprayed top-notch of black hair with shaved sides and white face makeup with black lipstick came stumbling in. Angelic came in after him yelling, "I told you, you need an appointment to see Mr. Jackson." "It's all right, Angelic," Levy said, waving at her from behind the desk. "I told him you weren't seeing anyone right now and he needed to make an appointment," she explained, grabbing the man by his leather jacket. "I said it's okay, Angelic," he told her. "I'll see him. You can go now." Angelic looked at him with surprise but released her grip. "Are you sure? I could get security." "No. You can go." He gave her a reassuring smile. "Okay. If you say so, Mr. Jackson," she replied before heading out of the office. "So, what can I do for you?" Levy asked, motioning the goth guy over to the dark brown leather guest chair. "Well, my name is Matthias Meadham and I run the band Goat Fucks," he told Levy with pride. "I'm sorry. I've never heard of your band." Levy cocked his head as he looked at his unusual guest. "I don't doubt it. We've only been on the scene for a few months," Matthias told him. "And I gather you are looking to see if we might take you on?" Levy asked. "Fuck no," Matthias told him. "We got a distribution company." "Then why are you here?" Levy looked confused. "I came because I want to buy something," Matthias said, giving Levy a wide grin. A familiar chill went down Levy's back. "The Symphony of Death," Levy stated. It wasn't a question. "Yep. I heard you guys had it and I figured after everything you might want to get rid of it," Matthias said. "Then you know what happened?" Levy said, surprised. "Shit, who doesn't?" "And you want to buy it?" Levy looked at him with disbelief. "Fuck yeah. That symphony could make my band," Matthias pointed out. "But you realize the damn thing's cursed?" "Oh, come on, dude. You think I believe in that supernatural shit? That shit is just bullshit for movies and books. There is no such thing as a cursed symphony," Matthias told him. "Then why you want it?" Levy asked. "Publicity, man," Matthias said, giving Levy a shrewd look. "I might not believe in that shit but a hell of a lot of other fuckers do and they'll pay to see this shit. It'll make my band legendary." Levy couldn't believe his ears. This guy was a complete idiot. All the deaths related to the symphony were real. Knowing the fucking thing had cost Mr. Manfrenini his life, yet this guy wanted to cash in on it. Anger filled Levy. He wanted to slap this arrogant fuck silly, but another idea struck his mind. If this son of a bitch wanted the symphony then he would give it to him. He stood up behind his desk, put both hands firmly of either side of him on it and leaned forward. He looked down at the goth guy in the guest chair and said, "Unload your pockets." "Excuse me?" Matthias asked, cocking his head and looking at Levy like he hadn't heard him correctly. "I said empty your pockets. Take out your wallet and dump it out on the desk," he told him. "Do I need to draw you a picture?" Matthias stood up and did as he was told. He pulled everything he had in the pockets of his pants and leather coat and placed it all on the desk in front of Levy. "Is this some kind of a test?" Matthias asked. Levy ignored him and watched him with a stern look on his face. "Is this it?" Levy asked finally, as Matthias put down a pair of round-rimmed sunglasses on the desk. "Yeah, that's the lot," Matthias confirmed. Levy looked at the pile before him. Besides the glasses there was a can of hairspray, a pack of spearmint gum, a grubby-looking gray handkerchief, a horribly worn-looking leather wallet, a cheap pen with a chewed cap, a checkbook with a missing cover, a beat-up credit card, a soiled crumpled paper napkin, 22 pennies, 3 dimes, a wrapped stack of quarters, 6 $20 bills, one $50 bill, and amazingly 3 $100 bills. Levy let out a sigh. "This is all you have?" he asked. "No. I got plenty of money in the bank," Matthias said defensively. "This is all you got on you?" Levy asked, correcting himself. "Besides the clothes on my back and my jewelry," Matthias confirmed. "Why? You want that too?" "That won't be necessary," Levy told him. Levy bent down and pulled open the bottom left side drawer of his desk. He picked up the red velvet-covered stack of sheet music from inside it and placed it on top of the desk. "This is the Symphony of Death by Philip Grassini," Levy told the goth guy, giving him a piercing stare. "So, you want this, knowing its history?" "Hell yeah," Matthias said, looking over at the parcel in front of Levy hungrily. "Fine. Pick up your wallet, credit card, checks and this hellacious thing and get the fuck out of my office." Matthias looked at Levy with stunned disbelief. "Do you need my boot up your ass?" Levy asked. "I said grab your shit and fuck off." Matthias jumped up out of his chair and quickly grabbed up his wallet, checks, and credit card. He paused for a moment and looked with disbelief at his velvet-bound prize before grabbing it off the desk and making a beeline for the door. It was almost like he was expecting Levy to suddenly say "fooled you" and take the symphony back, which was the farthest thing from his mind. After the office door slammed shut, Levy looked at his pathetic spoils again. For a second he had the urge to run out the door and grab the accursed symphony back, but that was just a second. Instead he picked up the round lens of sunglasses and put them on. "They look good on you," he heard a soft voice say from his left. He looked and saw a skinny gentleman in a brown Edwardian-style suit with a bowler hat and a walking stick with a silver globe as a handle step out of the shadows. The man had aquiline features with greased-back brown hair and a handlebar mustache. "Who the hell are you and what are you doing in my office?" Levy asked in shock. "You hit that right on the head," the man said, grinning at Levy. "Hell is the answer." Levy cocked his head and gave the man a questioning look. "But indeed the civilities must be maintained," the man told him. "Let me introduce myself. I'm Sam Hain Diablo. I represent the true owners of the Symphony of Death." "What?" Levy said, the warning chill once more going up his back. "I do have to admit you've surprised me, Mr. Jackson," Sam Hain said, waggling a thin manicured finger at him. "We honestly thought we were going to have to deal with another Lamonti, but here you go passing on the symphony. I know a few people back at the office who will be very unhappy. We had a betting poll going on you. I have to say I'm impressed though. But you have been a rogue element in this little play of ours." As Levy watched, Sam Hain started to change before his eyes. First his nose and chin began to lengthen. His ears got slightly bigger and became pointed. His brown eyes blazed and glowed red like two burning pieces of coal. Two small horns grew from under his bowler hat on his forehead. The teeth in his grinning mouth became pointed white daggers. His tongue grew long and swept over his teeth, drawing a trickle of dark blood that dribbled over them. His hands changed into thin talon-like claws with long pointed black fingernails. "What is it you want?" Levy asked, doing his best not to look intimidated. "Have you come to take me, like Mr. Manfrenini?" "Not at all, dear boy," the thing that had once been the thin man in the bowler hat said. Surprisingly his voice remained the same soft tone. "Though I should, given the trouble you nearly caused. But in the end things worked out. We even ended up gathering extra souls. You are very lucky there, because our hunger is more than sated and we have the option of showing leniency. After all, you nearly stopped the harvest in its tracks." "Harvest?" Levy asked, surprised. "Indeed. Hell has been preparing for this event for a very long time. It's the reason we compelled Philip Grassini to write the symphony in the first place. It's essential." "Why?" Levy asked. He figured since Samhain was being so forthright with the information he might as well ask. "We needed to get a large number of souls in one place," the demon told him proudly. "What better way to do so than via concert? Grassini was born with a unique talent for music. His music affects its listeners in just the way we needed. The music is the key to opening the way for us to get the souls once they are brought together. It has been engineered that way." "But I thought hell was only allowed to take the souls of sinners?" Levy asked with surprise. "This is a special circumstance. During harvest time any soul that hears or even touches the Symphony of Death is fair game. Good or bad it doesn't matter. All will be ours once the right band is chosen and all are gathered together." Samhain smiled his dagger grin at Levy. Levy stepped back and grabbed the edge of his desk for balance. He felt lightheaded. The implications of what he had just done hit him like a ton of bricks. "I see that look on your face," Samhain said, giving Levy a stern look and waggling a razor-sharp black-nailed claw at him. "You're off the hook. I would stay out of hell's way if I were you. I promise you things would not turn out well for you." But then Samhain's grin returned. "I suggest you enjoy your new position. After all, it has been what you've wanted for so long. No need for you to check in your invitation to hell before it is time." Samhain took his walking stick and swirled it across the floor in front of him. Suddenly a wide hole opened up in the floor in front of him. Smoke and the smell of rotten eggs issued from the hole. Also the sounds of screaming and animal-like roars echoed up from within it. "What you mean by that?" Levy asked. He felt ill. He was so nauseated he felt like he could vomit on the floor at any second. "Given your current position, you are pretty much assured a place in hell. Corruption is the way of the executive class. I would enjoy your good fortune while it lasts." Then the demon pulled a gold pocket watch on a gold chain out of his vest pocket and glanced at it. "Look at the time," he told Levy. "There is much to do before the great event. It is time to leave, but I don't want to say adieu since this will be our last meeting. So, I will simply say be seeing you. I suggest you make sure that happens well in the future." With that said, the demon named Samhain Diablo jumped into the hole, which immediately closed behind him. Only the slowly dispersing smoke and the methane smell gave any indication that he had ever been there. Levy stumbled backward and fell into his chair. He immediately hit the button on the intercom sitting on his desk. "Angelic, cancel all my meetings. I will be heading home early today. I'm suddenly not feeling well." "Understood," came Angelic's reply over the speaker. "What a day," he commented under his breath, shaking his head, as he grabbed up the glass of whiskey he had set aside for Mr. Manfrenini and downed it. He needed it. He figured Mr. Manfrenini would understand. In fact, he had no doubt about that given Mr. Manfrenini's current situation.